Welcome back to Shifting Overthinking to Marketing Movement, a limited audio series for creative, equity-led solopreneurs with a story and expertise to share. This gets you out of your own head to find clarity and direction so you can build sustainable marketing processes that fit your body, brain, and capacity. We were never meant to be productive 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, 52 weeks a year. Nothing in nature works like that. Capitalism is an inherently unnatural way to structure a society, and it's not your fault if the system failed you. It took me falling unconscious 2 blocks away from my son's school to realize that keeping things running on all cylinders all the time was not something I could sustain. In this episode and the next, we're going to talk about the day-to-day implementation, the planning, writing, recording, posting, and all of the things we're supposed to do to keep things running. I swore for the longest time that operations was my weakness, but I think what it really was is that I felt trapped in my business. And it was because as I planned my quarters, I didn't realize that not every month, week, quarter needed to be packed full of projects. Breathing room is a necessary part of the process. I took Lindsay Mack's Heart of Service course back in 2021 that talks about these cycles and connected it to the tarot. She refers to the cycles as gestation, creation, transition, and death. I'm not sure if it's still available, but if it is, if I find any of resources on her website about it, I'll link them in the show notes. You can also think of it like the cycles of the seasons or the moon. However you choose to define it for yourself, though, there is always a winter, there's a dark side of the moon, there is a time for quiet and integration. Unfortunately, when you're disabled or chronically ill, your bodies choose those cycles for us instead of the other way around. I'll talk about that more in the next episode, but I've noticed I get less severe flares when I am building in those rest periods after big pushes. The final and arguably most integral part of the framework I developed was capacity building content processes. I knew it was important, but beyond repurposing the lengthy, more meatier content or batching-like tasks, I didn't know how to define this in a way that made my plans doable and not just another way to beat myself up or doubt if I was cut out for this whole entrepreneurship thing. For the last 2 years, I've let January be a period of integration and processing the previous year instead of jumping into the high gear planning season that most people do. Other ways can be giving yourself a week off per month from client calls, taking a month off in the summer, like my friend Tracy Stanger. I've seen folks using the 13th week of the quarter as their reset week. I've stopped working weekends. I'm going to try to take what I've created for the last couple of months, schedule it throughout the summer. As you know, I'm recording this in April. And I'm going to see if while my kid is out of school, if I can try to commit to only working 4 hours per day. I'll let you know how that goes in the Story Spark Lounge if you are curious. But building in joy and rest is what's going to keep your work sustainable. And we need it to be sustainable because we need you and the work that you do. For the action step, you may not understand your energy patterns yet. We all have dips and times when we're most creative. The first aspect that I look at both with myself and I recommend to clients is understanding these energy patterns better for yourself. So for a few weeks, I know this is a longer term one, but stick with me. Track your time by the hour. You can use paper or a digital tool, but I tend to use paper because it reminds me to track the stuff that happens offline, like my household tasks, my chores, my errands, and things like that. Instead of, if it was a digital tool, I probably would only be charting like what's happening, purely work tasks or online tasks. Use this as information that will help you to make different decisions or just to be aware in how to manage your energy better. For me, I realized through this process that it takes me at least an hour to warm up in the mornings to get ready for deeply creative work. I can't just jump in like maybe some other folks do. Build in buffer or rest time into your routines. Where your energy naturally dips. And use some of the earlier examples as inspiration for yourself. Deciding on your own mix of structure and flexibility. On social media, I had a post queued up at the beginning of April that went through a lot of the things I was able to accomplish in the first quarter, despite having the flu. And then again, like I said before, despite taking January off from planning to process 2025 and before committing to any new projects or plans. There was no intent to shame anyone, but I also didn't really want to come across as, well, I'm chronically ill and I can do all of these things. Why can't you? So I held it back. But the one thing that I will say that was going to come from that post is a major life-changing insight that helped me these last few months is realizing that we all need varying levels of structure and we all need varying levels of flexibility built into our plans. And those levels will be different based on your own personal situations, but just winging it purely didn't work. When capacity did open up for me, I would flail for hours, not knowing what direction to go in, and overthinking would hit me hard. But then it becomes deceptively easy to go all in on building a structure that becomes more confining than helpful. I would use those plans as a way to beat myself up, which just made me lose motivation. Because if I wasn't going to follow a plan 100%, or I only had a good week, maybe a third of the time, why did it even matter? The true shift out of overwhelming and overthinking was seeing adjusting my plan not as a failure, but a feature. Something inherent to running my business and living my life, just as much as making sales or sending emails. When there are days where everything hurts and my brain doesn't want to work, I decide on whether this is a work from bed day, maybe work on my couch day, if it's sleep later and just have a later start, or if it's just a very bare minimum, let everyone know I'm alive type of day. When a whole week starts to spin out of control, I ask myself, what's one action I can take that would make me feel inspired or energized or accomplished? Looking at my roadmap or my list of projects, what one do I have energy for? Maybe I don't have the capacity for deep creative work, but maybe I can handle some of my admin or my mindless tasks. For example, let me go ahead and just organize photos on my phone or in Canva. This is something that will save me time in the grand scheme of things, but doesn't require a bunch of brain power for it. And it's a way that I can save energy or work for future me. But, a weird thing happened as I tempered my expectations. Instead of doing less, I did end up doing more things. I'm really not trying to flex with this. I'm just reporting this as an observation. My client projects stayed on track more often. Big projects that I'd been putting off, they did start to get done. I've heard people talk about getting rid of their shoulds to the point that it's basically cliche now. But I did realize, hey, I can't sit at my desk today due to pain, but I could still write. Or it's hard for my brain to boot up immediately after waking up. I realized that there was usually a should behind it. You should be at your desk. Otherwise, people will think you're not really working, because people who work from home get a lot of flack. Or you should be ready to work directly at 8 o'clock or 8:30 a.m. Who decided that? If I'm doing what I need to do, why does it matter? Freeing myself from the expectation of what a productive week should look like was what actually helped me to see momentum that hasn't happened in years. Finding that structure for yourself, but also finding ways to accommodate yourself. Just like HR would be required to accommodate you in your own job. Think about it like that. So now for the action step, now that you know your own patterns for when you are creative and when you're able to take action, use this as a guide to plan your week. Not with what you think you should be able to get done, but realistic with the time and energy you have. This week something may come up that forces you to adjust, which is okay. What can you take off of your plate? Or what's the simplest way to do that thing that you wanted to do that you can maybe just make it look better or optimize or do it the right way later? Or how can you better adapt your current environment to what you need to get your work done? In the next episode, we're going to tackle the weeks when even existing feels overwhelming. Planning for your low capacity days or weeks, or at least giving yourself an out, helps take the pressure off so that you can come back to work when you are ready without overthinking it. But in closing, let's make meaningful progress in our businesses by shifting out of overthinking, clarifying our priorities that match our capacity and values so that we can move forward in our marketing. I'll see you in the next one.